It's that thing of like, but that shouldn't matter. I'm like, I don't care. It's the world we live in.
For those of you out there who are willing to put yourself in that place where you can do those things, like, you will become indispensable very quickly, and there will always be a job for you the rest of your career.
Bring them what you think they are, and then show them how you like destroy those expectations. You like just knock it out of the park, or even just meet them. Or maybe you say like, hey, I've got a really aggressive set of expectations I want to set for myself, and I want you to hold me accountable. Are you frustrated whenever someone says something like titles don't matter? Have you struggled to understand what you should focus on to advance your career? Ever wondered how the heck you get promoted in game dev? Getting promoted is not something we're trained on when we enter game development. On the contrary, it sometimes seems like it's uncouth to even bring it up. Phrases like titles don't matter, or don't worry about that, just focus on doing the work, get tossed around a lot, but don't actually help and aren't actually true either. So in this episode, we're going to give you our take on what it means to get promoted and how to think about moving through the various levels of being a game development professional. You're listening to Building Better Games, where we show industry leaders a better way to make games that players love. Your hosts are Benjamin Karsage and Aaron Smith. We've spent over a decade shipping some of the biggest games in the world. We've also helped game studios around the world improve their approach to building great games. Our mission is simple: help you ship better games with less work and fight back against the dysfunctional systems that frustrate studios around the world.
I think it's safe to say that if we're talking about getting promotions, we're having a very different conversation depending on the level that you're at in the organization. And I think there are also many paths to achieving that. And I think a lot of us have at times have felt in our careers like we're perhaps limited in which paths are available. And an example of this is like one of, I think, the fastest ways to get promoted, especially in a growth industry, historically like video games, is to leave your company. And this is kind of an answer that I think nobody really likes. And I think it's because most people are not incentivized personally to like the outcome of that. So like, most of us, if we're already in a job, we'd prefer to just be able to stay in that job because it's easier than going back out and interviewing again. Like typically the only time that's not the case is when things are so bad that we want to leave anyway. Opportunistic leaving also has like a very bad reputation in all industries. Like we don't like the jumper, right? Like we question the jumper, we question their loyalty. Nowadays, it's not unusual to see somebody with a different company on their resume for every year that they worked. But certainly, I think, again, nobody's really incentivized to encourage you to do that, even if it's best for you. So, that's why you and I are here, is because, we don't have any masters currently in the games industry. So we can just tell you how it is. And one of the things I would say is always understand where your line is, like what it would take for you to leave your current company. And I also think like there's nothing wrong with just casually interviewing from time to time to see what comes out of that. Because at the end of the day, whether you're a capitalist or not, like whether you identify as a capitalist or not, we currently live in a world that is where these things are dictated by supply and demand. So if somebody's willing to pay you more, give you a higher title with what you're doing today and what you offer today, that's worth considering. And maybe we can talk about some of the more nuanced things around that, like counteroffers and, using that as leverage with your current boss and stuff like that things get a little bit more complicated there. I once heard a phrase, somebody once told me, if you're going to pull a gun on your manager, you better be ready to pull the trigger. Which is obviously a terrifying analogy, but there's a lot of truth in it. So
I like that we're starting here because, look, we're going to talk today about what we think would help you get promoted in game dev. But I want to be really clear. This is our take. This is our advice. I actually have seen it work. Like what I'm going to share, what we're going to talk about. Aaron's seen this stuff work. But also recognize there are places where they don't care about any of what we're talking about. There are places where none of this works. There are places where other systems are in play that have nothing to do with what we're going to discuss. And you can spend a lot of time trying to crack the code of any number of toxic or dysfunctional or even functional organizations to figure out what it means to be up for promotion and have that go through all the way, or to get a raise or whatever it might be. And every organization is a little different in these ways. So we're going to give you some generic guidelines.
I want to highlight a point you made, which is that, like, to your point, even functional, even when all the best intentions and most of the best actions are in place, we're still constantly going to find ourselves subject to human nature, human fallibility, human systems, and the ups and downs of those systems, right? And so there's a realism we have to apply to this, which is that, like, we have to build the skills to navigate that stuff, even when it is going well. I took a crack at kind of like breaking down, like, what are the big buckets here that feel relevant. I'm curious what you think about this. Pardon me. There's environmental factors, some of which we talked about. There's behavioral factors, I think. And then I put the final bucket, perhaps poorly labeled, is impact. And I broke that down into two sub buckets. One is relationship impact, and the other one is results impact. Like whatever that organization views as results, whether that's making good products or leading great teams or having everybody be happy or whatever that is, whatever the results you're held accountable for, like your impact on those results. And it's worth noting that, like, results are the thing I think we wish to believe a lot of the time are the only thing that matters. And I've certainly been in a situation in my career, probably a couple times, where I was gated by behavioral or environmental things that were frustrating for me. And because I felt like my impact is high, so therefore I should get promoted. And it's like, no. Like, and sometimes I was lucky enough to have savvy enough managers to sit me down and explain to me why those other things mattered and where the gap was with them. So I don't know, what do you think about those three buckets? Do you think I'm missing anything?
I think actually that covers a lot of it. So when I think about environmental, that's again a lot of the stuff we discussed. Hey, there's stuff that's outside of your control. It's the broad culture of the organization, how HR works, like a bunch of different stuff.
One thing could be is, like, you're at a 40-person studio or a 30-person game studio, and they're like, perhaps the way that the company started up was that the C-level and the director level was like top heavy. And so that, like, whereas like at Riot, we had a scenario where, like, we actually had a very bottom heavy organization. And so there was often a power vacuum at the top, like, that naturally created, like, we needed more leaders all the time.
And especially, I'll speak to this as well in the environmental, if your organization is scaling rapidly, that means vacuums are emerging. If your organization is incredibly stable, that means vacuums are probably not emerging. And when they do open up, they're probably going, who already knows how to do this? Let's hire somebody to fill that role versus promote internally.
So is this a situation where we feel like we have to promote one of these folks because they're all working really hard and, like, we need to give them a treat to reward them for what they're doing? Or is it a situation where it's like, we need somebody to run this thing or it will not work, and so one of these people has to be that person? And so then the organization is incentivized to actually grow people.
Right. And if you look at, there is the specific title you will have doesn't mean the same thing if you're an indie or AA or AAA or publishing or whatever. Like, what does it mean to be senior? Well, I'm the art director. Yeah, you're the art director and you just graduated college because you and 5 friends all decided to start a game studio and you're the artist. So congratulations, you're the art director. Or maybe you're the chief creative officer, right? And you, like, jump right into the executive level. Now, if I think about how effective you're going to be in that role compared to an associate artist who's been working at Bungie for the last 3 years, you're going to have a very different set of experiences and a very different sort of skill set after 6 months than that other artist will be, but they may be a much better artist than you when it comes to thinking about like, how do I create a AAA product and these sorts of things. And you may be a much better person at thinking about how do I just barely slam all this stuff together and how do I go find things that I need to continue to not fail at my job because we're all just wearing a million hats and me being the chief creative. So it's, again, we have to be careful around like, I was told when I was fairly junior that at a particular company I would have been a dev director, and I was like, that just doesn't make any sense to me, right? I'm an associate, right? What's going on here? And so anyway, so that's also the environmental piece, and it means level setting can be really hard.
Yeah, and by the way, my recommendation to address that would be, it doesn't matter how capable you are of like doing this well in your own mind, but you probably need to actually write that down on a sheet of paper. Like if you're hearing this, what we're talking about right now, and you're like, that's a real tough thing about the games industry. It is. That levels just are meaningless from across studios. Like senior here means associate, here means director, here it's all meaningless, right? It's not. It's just, it makes it really, really hard for you to map out your own journey, your own path. So what you probably need to do is, again, grab a white sheet of paper and write down associate, mid, senior, director, VP, whatever the levels are. It doesn't really matter. This is a thought exercise. And then write down in terms of impact and capability what you associate with each of those roles. And then that'll get the juices flowing in your own head, so that if you're an associate and you're like, well, I think I should be able to run a team of 7 people. And I think I should be able to, I'm making this up here, but like deliver a component fully. I should be able to manage dependencies with my partner teams. I should be able to, create a product roadmap, or like whatever those things are that you think you should be able to do, write them down and then socialize that with the people around you and get their feedback on it, and then refine and modify that. And then use that as a way to map your own progress, because your company may have a completely different framework. But like if you're using purely that external leveling to determine your own path forward in your career, you're going to be very disappointed. And by the way, one of the examples I see that happens a lot is I was often surprised at how many people with like 20, 30 years of experience who had very lofty titles at their previous companies just really struggled to deliver basic things. Yeah, exactly. Like really didn't have a lot of the basic skills. And, at a lot of, forgive me for the term, but like, I'm going to be a little bit rude here, but like there was a lot of empty suits in our industry. And so what I'm trying to say is there is a separation between how you will be leveled by the people who are hiring you or promoting you, and how you view yourself and what you want for yourself. So like if you want to be able to run a 50-person team, you got to figure out how to learn how to run a 50-person team. And that might be a completely separate conversation than whether you get promoted to senior or not. We talked about upward mobility was the first big thing we talked about there. And that, like, I by the way, I feel like it's crazy how many people I know that are out there looking for jobs, like how many young pups I talk to. And I always ask them, they're like, oh, I got this interview at the studio and it's really exciting and they do this cool thing. And I'm like, cool, how's upward mobility? And I always get a blank stare every single time. I'm like, that if you're an associate or you're coming in out of college, that should be the only thing that matters. Like they could pay you in Monopoly money to start if there's upward mobility there. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people that don't want to hear that. Like we live in a world today where it's like, I should be paid a livable wage and I should get this and I should have this and I shouldn't have to worry. And, unpaid internships are bad. And like, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to argue with you on that platform. But what I'm trying to say is when you're early on in your career, presumably you're planning on taking this seriously and busting your ass. You should focus on how much your efforts are going to be rewarded. Because like, trust me on this, I think this is true for most people. You might have a steady paycheck, but just being stuck in your role forever and being a cog in the machine is usually the thing that I hear most of the time when people are unsatisfied in their roles and they're frustrated and they want a way out. And so one of the best ways you can avoid that is to find a company or find a situation or find a team or find a boss. Again, environmental factors where there's space open above you so that you can move. Like, even to the point where you can sit down and say, hey, if I do really well in the first year, what's on the table here? And get a commitment from your hiring manager early on in the process.
So I'm gonna put a slightly different spin on this. I think this is a really interesting conversation around where do you land and where would you kick off? Because for me, like, someone's coming out of school, one, I am also like, regardless of whether I think they're good or bad or whatever, hey, if you find an unpaid internship that gets you into the career or field you want, and there's opportunities that'll come out of that, then that's worth taking. By the same token, I think sometimes you may take a job so that you can say you've worked that job. And even if there's not upward mobility in that location, the fact that you have that you're gaining experience in the role, but the thing there is you have to be ready to move on if that company won't move you on. And so again, there's this idea of like the mistake I think that I made, because I'm not quite as strong on this as you are, but I suffered the consequences for not, is I basically said, well, the company is going to treat me well and they're going to do right by me, even if I don't do anything, just because and it was sort of this hope that like, they're going to care as much about my career as I will. And the reality is, no, they don't. No, they don't. And it's not that they don't care. It's not that they're bad or evil or anything. It's just that nobody cares as much about your career probably as you do. And by the way, if you don't care about your career at all, great. This probably isn't a podcast you care about. But most people do have some interest in advancing over time. And so what I was really doing was naively and somewhat, I think it was like a way to avoid responsibility for me taking charge of my own career. I was just optimistically, again, totally a dodge, a deflection of me taking responsibility for myself. I was just saying like, I hope my managers all take good care of me. And I believe they will, because this is a cool company. And it was a cool company. And I had a lot of great managers. And some of them did take really good care of me.
I think that there's a little bit of naivete, which I think is common in young people too. And I think some of it is being missed.
Great, Aaron. Great. Now you just crushed our young audience. Now we're just stuck
no.
with a bunch
It's
of
I mean
focus.
I present company included, right? Where I was going to go is like some of it comes from the way that most kids are raised these days, which is like most kids, if you're a millennial, like, so this goes back to probably like early to mid 80s. But if you were raised between then and now, there's a high likelihood that like academic achievement was like a really big deal, and that your parents had high standards for you, and that there were rigorous rules about like what was inbounds and what was out of bounds, and, you know, win the trophy, get the prize, get the blue ribbon, like lots of very achievement based thinking. And I think that one of the things that's built into those systems, and college is like this too, which is like, if you show up, you work hard, you stay focused, and you do the thing, the reward will come. And I think a lot of young people, myself included, by the way, in the first 5-6 years of my career, had a rude awakening when you realize that it's not that simple. I got this close to being fired, and I was working harder, and like my tactical output was more than anybody around me. And it took me, I was lucky that I was able to make the brain pivot to like have that aha moment and realize, oh, I'm missing something here. It's super, super important. And I think that like there is that naivete where it's like, well, I'm doing all the things and I'm doing them well, so obviously they should see that I'm doing that and they should reward me. And I'm like, if that's how you feel, if you feel really like sort of ethically or morally stuck to that idea, you need a little bit of a wake-up call. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying that to just understand that there's more going on here. Understand that there's more complexity. Like, I've seen engineers that were absolutely brilliant, their code output, their like ability to write software was unparalleled. But because they couldn't build relationships with anyone at the organization, no one wanted to advocate for them. So perhaps on paper, they would have been the perfect senior engineers, but they missed a piece of it, right? They missed the relationship piece, and then they missed the advocacy piece.
We want to take a quick break from the podcast. There's no shortage of challenges in game development, and leaders are often attempting to solve huge problems without the support, direction, or mentorship they need. It leads to stress, anxiety, and even feelings of isolation. We've been that leader feeling out in a limb with no help, and we wish that on no one. Because of this, Aaron and I are offering focused short-term coaching for the challenges you are facing. We'll spend time with you every week to help you understand and overcome what's in your way. If you've got problems and want help from coaches who have spent real time leading game development, check out the show notes or head to buildingbettergames.gg and click coaching. Thanks. Let's get back into it. And I think this is so we talked about environmental. The second thing you brought up was behavioral. And I kind of view that there's this bucket of things that are like, what's the culture and how well are you integrating with the culture of the place you're at? And then you brought up the sort of impact, and you looked at that through relationship, which I think Venn diagram overlaps somewhat with the behavioral cultural piece. And then we have the sort of results oriented impact. Like, what is it that you've actually created? And so I actually really like that frame. I don't know, we might discover some things that are missing in there, but if we've talked about that environmental piece, now we're kind of talking about that impact frame. And we're kind of and I think the trap that people fall into around promotions is they go, if my results impact, and they tend to define this very narrowly as how much work I'm outputting or how much stuff I'm doing. If that is high and getting higher over time, then that means I should get promoted, right? And one, it's not true because it ignores the other buckets. It ignores behavioral, it ignores the relational, and it ignores the environmental. But two, like you and I both observed people who were in that world, and just like you just described yourself, they were focusing on the wrong level. And so how they understood impact and results was purely through, did I produce more stuff? Did I write better code? Was my art did I produce my concepts faster? Or was it like something that would look better to other artists? And what you realize over time, that's not the impact we're talking about. That's like a trap part of this one thing.
Well, it's even worse because everyone will tell you that that's the thing that matters.
Exactly. Yes.
But then that's not how it actually plays out though.
Right. And that's by the way, what you get training on it, you study under people and they teach you how to do all this better. And it's like, can you do more? Can you do more? Can you do more? And I remember they were running a 30-person team and they were darned convinced they should be promoted because of how well they were running it. And I was looking at them and I was going, no, you should not be. And the reason you should not be is because you haven't figured out how to scale yourself. You're working yourself to death. And you're working yourself to death for a promotion, but what you haven't figured out how to do, in this case, this was a mid-level leader who was looking to be promoted to a senior level leader. What I was looking for, and the people around that person was looking for, was actually not you work yourself to death for a promotion doing the same things that you would have done if you had a 5-person team. It was to make the shifts necessary to operate effectively and in a sustainable way on a 30-person team. And it was like higher level thinking that was not available. And again, one of the reasons it wasn't available was because they were so busy working all the time doing every little thing.
Now, I want to be careful about this because there are a lot of organizations, much to my chagrin and yours, that is the way to get promoted, is just to have a higher output than everyone around you. But I would say though that those organizations tend to have not thought through what the standards of leadership are. They have tend to not thought through what it means to actually scale yourself. Like, so these are on these subjects, I call these organizations dumb organizations. And it's really, really important. Like Ben and I will give these companies feedback when we work with them that it's actually a bad pattern, because it's not just that you don't make any you don't distinguish at all between people at different levels and the nature of the way their responsibility needs to change to run effective organizations. But on top of that, you end up promoting people purely based on output. And then what ends up happening is, okay, well, if I'm a junior engineer and I get promoted to mid and then I get promoted to senior, and then now I'm managing 5 other engineers, and my whole career up to this point, all I've been judged by is how much code I can get written. then the logical thing for me to do now that you've given me 5 engineers under me is to basically just micromanage the crap out of all 5 of those people so that they produce as much physical code as possible. Now, other people might be like listening to this and going like, well, that's not the way to manage. Exactly. That's the point. But like a lot of organizations actually don't promote people who would or could be good managers. They promote people basically because they're like, oh, you did so much. Maybe if you run more things, you'll get everybody else to do so much as well. And I'm like, that is a busted way to think about things. But I just want to call that out. There are a lot of organizations that operate this way. But in a world that is more towards what we would consider the ideal, the one Ben just articulated, which is that it means something different to run a team, or it means something different to be senior. It implies a more strategic view, or a more developed ability to solve problems or build relationships with other teams, or whatever that means. That's where this behavioral principle comes into play. And that behavioral principle is like, act like the role above you. Like, figure out what that role above you means at your company and start mimicking that behavior and building the skills that are necessary for you to mimic that accurately. This is one thing nobody else taught me until I was about halfway through my career. And it just resonates as so true. And by the way, it could be as complex as like, well, I've noticed all the team leads at my company have like developed critical thinking skills. Like they have the ability to like work through, find a good solution, and then sell that solution to the people around them very quickly and get movement. So I need to build that skill. Another example could be like, I need to wear a button-up shirt at work because everybody that runs a team here wears a button-up shirt. They don't come in with holey jeans and a crusty old Pokemon shirt that they've had for 15 years. Like, I know that might sound judgy. I'm not saying I care if you wear a Pokemon shirt, but I guarantee you that your company cares, because what you're seeing, if you see a level of homogeneity in the way those people dress at that level, I'm telling you, there's a reason why that's happening. And this was also feedback I got when I was senior. And I was like, I was feeling a little stuck. I had people come up to me and be like, you dress like a slob. And like, we love you. We're not trying to give you a hard time, but like, you look like a kind of like a dumb kid who doesn't know how to go clothes shopping. And it puts a, you know.
Well, and I think it's that thing of like, but that shouldn't matter. I'm like, I don't care. It's the world we live in. Like, and so this is, I think again, that this is one of the big things about getting promoted, accept reality, right? And I love what you said too about like what you should do. You look at the people that are the layer above you, and then you attempt to act like them, and you're gonna fail if you're new and you're not ready. And that's okay. Yeah, pick the good ones. Pick the good ones. To Aaron's point, I don't care either what kind of shirt you wear. But the reality is that organization does. This comes into that third bucket Aaron was talking about, the behavioral thing, which is there is a company where you can wear the 15-year-old Pokemon shirt and get promoted. And there's another company where you're not getting promoted unless you wear a tie, suit and tie every day, right? In fact, maybe just to get in the door, you have to wear a suit and tie. And
probably not in games, but yeah.
Probably not in games. Yeah, not in games. But I'm just saying, out there it exists. Gosh, that would be a weird games company. I can't, it's hard for me to imagine. So when I look at that, this is actually the behavioral. And when you look at the behavioral bucket, it's like, what is the culture? How are people behaving? What tends to get rewarded and what tends to get punished inside of this structure? You need to start going you need to start understanding those incentives and attempting to map your behavior against them. And I say this very cautiously because what I don't want to do is for someone out there to be like, okay, the way to get promoted is just to become the perfect version of this. No. You still have to be you. And actually, both Aaron and I have hit points in our career where we made choices that negatively impacted our viability for promotion because we had a personal standard or ethic or principle or whatever it was, a value that we were like, this is more important than the promotion. And as you go through your career, you're going to hit those. And it's okay to then go like, hey, I'm not going to follow this. I think it's a bad pattern.
Yeah, we talked about impact in terms, and the reason I think of relationships in terms of impact is because I think relationships are a big chunk of what allows you to have an impact on an organization. So like an example of this is how much do the people around you view you as a positive force for change in their lives and their work and for the company. And the reason I call this relationships is because you could be there is a world where you actually have a very, very positive physical impact, but nobody perceives that to be the case. And there is a world where everybody perceives that the case and that impact is actually little. And both of those situations are bad. What you want to do is try to manage both, right? And at the end of the day, we had Zach Blitz on the podcast a long time ago, and I loved how he sort of like really distilled this idea down to like, are you meeting people's needs? Like, do people look at you when you walk by in the proverbial hallway or when you pop into the Zoom call or whatever, and do they go, that person's helping me? That person makes my job easier or better? That to me is sort of the foundation of relational impact, relationship impact.
And I'll go deeper on that and say, if you're looking to be promoted, you have to understand who are the people responsible for my promotion, and are they viewing me that way as a positive force for change and good in the context of this studio? And I know there's a lot of people out there, because I did the same thing, who knee-jerk away from that idea and say, that's brown nosing. I don't want to be a butt kisser or whatever like that. It's like, look, man, you can view the world that way, but there's a reality that those are the people that are responsible for your promotion. I'm not saying focus all your attention just on them and screw everybody else and do a bunch of immoral nonsense. I am saying they are the ones who hold expectations for you, your role, what it means to be promoted, all these things. If you think caring about that is brown nosing, promotions will be few and far between for you. I'm just going to let you know.
I also want to separate the idea of approaching that in terms of doing everything that person says, agreeing with everything they say, making them like you and think like being like a sycophant. Because I've actually seen people who are incredibly adept at moving up in organizations actually agitate some of those people while also having their advocacy. So in that, and to me, I think that was a lesson I learned early on. It's like that person needs to value you and to view you as, and it needs to be seen as good for them and the organization to elevate you. That's the standard. It doesn't mean that they think you're the greatest person. It doesn't mean that they want to get a beer from you. It doesn't even mean that they can walk into a room and tell you what to do and you're going to do it. Like, I've actually had leaders who I worked with, like stakeholders who I worked with, who probably felt at times like they couldn't tell me anything, but they respected me and my ability to get things done and to move mountains within their organizations. And so when it came promotion time and I was being qualitatively assessed, they were an advocate for me. And that leads me to the next point, which is soliciting that advocacy. So what we talked about actually is sort of building the relationship with people of influence, like the people who will decide. But there's another thing too, which is like actually making sure that they are actively advocating for you. And because for somebody to be like, yeah, Ben's great, is not the same as them being like, Ben is great and we should promote Ben. So one of those is a nod and an acknowledgement. The other one is advocacy. And advocacy is something I feel like a lot of people forget about, and they don't farm or harvest it properly. And it is something I learned the hard way in my career too, which is sit down with one of those people and have a conversation with them. At first, have that conversation be again about meeting their needs to build the relationship. But once the relationship gets positive enough, then start inviting a conversation about what they would need to see from you in order to get behind you for a promotion. And that might sound like a scary conversation, but it doesn't have to be, because presumably this person already likes and respects you. And now all you're doing is, again, asking what you would need to do. So you're internalizing responsibility in that conversation in order to get their advocacy. And once you start doing those things and you get that advocacy, now you're in a very powerful position, because then when it comes time, the sort of yearly review check-in or whatever, that person's going to be like, we should promote. And that more than anything else, more than any of these buckets we just gave, more than impact, if every single person in that room is obviously Ben gets a promotion this year, it's done. It's done. It's over. The conversation is over. And so that's the power of that. And so when we're talking about, again, about relationships and relationship impact, we're talking about building credibility with the people around you and building credibility with influencers. And then we're talking about actively soliciting support from people. And what's also great about inviting that conversation and starting that conversation is I've encouraged a lot of younger people starting out in their careers to do this. And one of the common things they run into is that their boss, they find out very quickly that their boss or one of these key influencers is very non-committal. And that's very good for you to know. Like Ben and I have both been in that situation where like the boss is just like, you're doing great, Tiger. You're doing great, Tiger. You're doing great, Tiger. And we're like, okay, cool. So you're going to advocate for me, right? And then they're like, question mark, question mark, question mark over their head. And then you find out later that when they were in the review panel, they didn't say a thing. They didn't lift a finger to advocate for you. And that goes back to the environmental factor. Are you in an environment where no manager wants to stick their neck out for promotions, period, under any circumstances? That would be one with minimal upward mobility, not just for you, but for anybody. So like, again, like by you inviting and soliciting that conversation, you are allowing the organization to tell you what it's actually going to do in those situations. And that helps you make a decision.
And by the way, it's funny, this ties into the conversations around accountability we've had lately, but it's like, hey, you can bottom up this to a large degree. And so when we're talking about like, well, what does it mean to build this relationship? Well, it's a bunch of things. You know, yes, you want to be a decent human being and all those sorts of things. You want to fit inside of the behavioral model of the culture you're a part of, insofar as that doesn't violate your own principles and values. You also want to engage these people and go like, what are your expectations of me? And if they don't have any or they aren't presenting that to you, and if that's not meaningful, if it's just like, yeah, just do a good job, bring them what you think they are and then show them how you like destroy those expectations. You like just knock it out of the park, or even just meet them. Or maybe you say like, hey, I've got a really aggressive set of expectations I want to set for myself and I want you to hold me accountable. People will appreciate this. They'll look at you differently because you're trying to show them that you're actually operating at the layer above, at the title above where you currently are. And one of the best ways to do that is to go and show like, look at the expectations that I'm setting for myself and that you're setting for me and that I'm meeting. Those expectations seem to align more with mid than associate. Wouldn't you agree? And if they're like, yeah, they do. Oh my gosh, right? And again, you will be annoyed sometimes that they're like, it will be irritating to you that they don't realize that on their own. But I'm telling you, you care more about your career than anybody else in all likelihood. And it's not because they're bad, it's because they're thinking about other stuff.
Yeah, well, one thing is if they do realize that, you're in a very powerful position because, you know, a lot of this we're talking about through the lens of like management's incentives. You have to play into their incentives, right? Or if their incentives are really, really bad and will never involve you getting promoted, you need to go to another company. But like one of the things we're talking about is like, I've been in a room where I'm like assessing people for promotions. And one of the things that's interesting when it comes up, to Ben's point, is a situation where somebody is clearly operating actively and effectively 1 to 2 layers above where they're being compensated and what their title says. That actually is a very awkward thing for everybody in that room. And our incentive is to fix that. Our incentive is to fix that because it creates a bunch of other problems if you don't fix it. It's not just about that person. And so this is actually an ace that you have in your sleeve. And by the way, so if you're early on in your career, this is where like boss comes in and says, hey, I have this project and I have nobody to take it. You may have no idea what to do with that project, but you volunteer for that stuff. You work the extra hours, like you do what you need to. And again, this is a controversial topic, right? Because like, well, I'm an associate, I shouldn't have to do mid-level work, or I work 40 hours a week, I shouldn't have to work 60. That's fine. That is a decision that everybody needs to make for themselves. I am not coming at this from a moral or ethical position. I am simply telling you that what I see overwhelmingly proven true over and over again is that the people who volunteer for that stuff, the people who are always taking more responsibility and trying new things and being bold and putting themselves out there, and also the people who are willing to work harder than the people around them, that is a massive accelerant. Like even that will get you around even a bad culture. Because if you're outworking everybody around you, you become indispensable. Like that is a real thing that can happen. And I can tell you, as somebody who managed teams of dozens of developers and producers across my career, like you know who those people are on your team. Like the people where it's like, if we lost this person, the shit hits the fan. You want to be that person, because then it's only the sky's the limit. Right. And so that's super important. And again, I know that a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, but for those of you out there who are willing to put yourself in that place where you can do those things, like you will become indispensable very quickly, and there will always be a job for you the rest of your career, even during tough times.
And by the way, this idea of indispensable, like I think some people are like, well, I don't want to be the single point of failure. And it's like, it's not that. It's actually that the leaders above you recognize all the value you bring. And so I want to segue into this idea of impact, right? Because we talked about it through the lens of it often gets miscast as working hard, right? And someone might have just taken what you just said and said like, oh, so you want me to just work really hard and work harder than everybody else? No, but maybe. It's actually, I want you to work more effectively. And what I mean by effectively is I want you at the center of delivering more value than your peers and even the people a layer above you. And value here is a really tough word to define, and because it varies based on your environment. But a simple shortcut that, again, I'm going to say because it's actually how this works, if you are meaningfully solving the problems of the people, of your boss and your stakeholders and the team that you're on, and everybody sort of recognizes that you consistently solve the problems that they have and help them meet their goals and all these different things, people are going to see you as valuable. Now, there's some more advanced framing things about, there's the person who like everybody loves, but no one would promote, and you got to be careful about some of those things. But if you're actually delivering high impact consistently, you will become that person who's indispensable. And you may not have to work 80 hours a week. You may be doing it in 40, because what you're actually becoming better at is identifying the real problems that people have and getting to the bottom of them faster than anybody else.
By the way, the reason this is an interesting conversation, and I think it's really, really, really important, especially for people who are junior in their careers. The reason I bring up hard work is because hard work is something anyone can do. And that's why it's important. And by the way, anyone is probably you if you're straight out of college and you have no idea. You just got your first job and you have no clue what you're doing. You are just every day teetering on being a liability for your organization. It's not you. That's not you. It's all of us when we're in that position, right? It's very tough. It's very tough. You don't know anything, right? Like it's like
I'm just thinking about all the mistakes I made and all the
Warren Buffett, one of his famous quotes that I love is like when he talks about his first boss and mentor, and he's like, I should have paid him. Like if I'm honest with myself, I should have paid him, because he was providing me more value than I was providing him. And so again, it's just accept reality. It's okay to be junior. There's nothing wrong with it. But the reason I bring up hard work is because hard work is your way to make up that gap. And hard work allows you to fuck up. It allows you to make mistakes and still cover more ground than you're losing. So that's the role of hard work. It's just it's ham-fisted, but it's also a great panacea for all of the gaps that you will have as a junior person.
And what I would encourage heavily, don't think that the hard work is the end unto itself, because then you will fall into the trap we talked about earlier of just trying to work harder, and then you're going to be annoyed at some point when you're like, I'm not getting promoted and I'm working really, really, really hard. No, focus on learning. As Aaron said, the hard work is a ham-fisted solution. I'm not saying people that are senior don't work hard. They do. Absolutely they do. But it's that they've learned how to really maximize the time that they're working. And so when they're working hard, they're getting that much more done. And that's who you want to become.
Back to your point about value earlier. I mean, I think it almost becomes a comical gap between value and hard work as you go up the chain. Like, I mean, I think most people that have worked in the corporate world have probably worked with a director or VP that was constantly busy, constantly in meetings, constantly working late, constantly doing the documents, constantly just overwhelmed in a proverbial torrent of crap 24/7. And just everybody looked at them as ineffective. Like, we just know that person is an ineffective leader. We know that their impact on the organization is low, and we know that the value they deliver is low. So like right there, that's something to always keep in your mind. And by the way, I know very few of these people, only a handful, and I view them frankly as geniuses in what they do. But there are people out there who they're so sort of mentally calibrated towards understanding what other people value and what impact truly means, that they're able to actually get themselves to a place where they can work literally part-time and still outpace all of their peers when it comes to impact or value. And it may sound like something that's impossible, but I think the truth is that most organizations, those people will actually get promoted, and that will actually cause frustration for their peers. So this is a demonstration that while hard work might serve as a temporary panacea when you're very junior, but it quickly becomes the opposite. It actually quickly becomes a distraction. And so you need to be constantly thinking, and by the way, that's why when I give the example of boss coming in and saying, hey, there's a project here and I don't have a leader who can take this on, I view that as not you taking on more work, although it is. I view that as you taking on more responsibility. And I think that the more responsible you become within the context of an organization, the more promotable you become. Like, we all know around us who are the like linchpins, who are the fulcrums, who are the most responsible individuals, who are just like, they're the nexus of so many valuable things. You want to be that person. We covered a lot. Remember the 3 major pillars of this that we made up on the fly. So if you think there are 4, you are probably right. Environmental, behavioral, and impact. And think about impact not just in terms of delivery or in terms of getting stuff done or adding value, but also in terms of the impact that you have on other people and the relationships that you build and the support that you have. So keep in mind those 3 things. If you need to listen to this a couple times, don't hesitate to do this as well, that as well, because we really did cover a lot of stuff, and this is a really complicated topic. I'll actually say this as to interrupt the conclusion just briefly. I was surprised. We often get into nuanced stuff when we're going through this, but in this one in particular, there is massive nuance around all of this. That was just became more and more clear to me as we were discussing it. Yes. But these are definitely things that if you take responsibility, you can give yourself an edge. And I think that even during tough times, when a lot of folks are getting laid off and things feel really difficult, there's still a lot of opportunity for enterprising people who are willing to do this stuff and take it to the next level. So in that, did you enjoy this content? Every 2 weeks, we're going to deliver one actionable step that will increase your chances of delivering a successful game straight to your inbox. Join game developers across the world and sign up for the Building Better Games newsletter at www.buildingbettergames.gg/newsletter. Again, that's www.buildingbettergames.gg/newsletter. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Over the last few years, producers have been asking Aaron and I, what's my role? What are the skills I should develop? How do I advance in my career? Game production is in a rough state. We've launched a course to help. It's called Succeeding in Game Production, What You Aren't Taught. Early feedback from our beta tester and early access audience has been overwhelmingly positive, so we're looking to help even more producers. If that's of interest, check it out in the show notes or head to buildingbettergames.gg and click course. Thanks. Appreciate you listening.